I do love celebrating all things about South Australia, though. The great people, the great places, the great businesses. You might have seen Antimo's article in the Advertiser or online today talking about Bruce Howe. Bruce Howe was an Adelaide music pioneer. Bruce Howe is a man that we really need to know a lot more about, and often, as is the case in death, you find out more when these obituaries and people come out and speak about them. I thought, well, let's go straight to the top, because a man who was not only a good friend of Bruce Howe's, but he's also the co-director and music promoter for Grape organisation, Victor Marshall. Lovely to see you, Victor. Thank you for coming in.
Oh, thank you, Leith. Thank you for having me.
Tell us about Bruce Howe and why we should know Bruce Howe.
Well, Bruce Howe was probably one of the most significant musicians of the 20th century in Australia. He's credited as being a mentor to Bon Scott, Jimmy Barnes and John Swan. He was in quite a multitude of bands. You had the Clefs, which turned into Levi Smith's Clefs, and Fraternity, Some Dream, Mickey Finn, the Mega Boys, and over a 4-decade period of time in some of Australia's top bands.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So someone of my generation, I don't know a lot of these bands, but I'm imagining people at home are listening going, I remember them. Like he was in all of those. He's passed away at the age of 77, Victor, at Semaphore, not far from the Largs Pier Hotel, where I'm assuming, like I hear the history of the Largs Pier and how many great bands played there, how many great gigs there would have been in the time.
Oh, yes. Well, Bruce used to talk about, even on a Wednesday night, there would be a row of people going down the esplanade there, all lined up to go into the Largs Pier, and people were getting turned away. Yep. That's how popular Fraternity were.
It was fairly willing, wasn't it, at the time too? I think it was... You know, you had a good time, but yeah, you might have to get the dougs up just in case it got a bit willing at some stage.
Oh, well there's talks of there were a few fights and things there, but it was actually, he told me that it was the first place that ever did a drive-through bottle-o.
Is that right?
Yeah.
The Largs Pier. Okay.
Yeah, the Largs Pier Hotel.
So we're going to get on to what you do with Grape, but let's talk about, because you are a music aficionado. You're like a South Australian music historian of sorts, aren't you? And you're doing work with that with your degree now.
Yeah, so I'm doing a PhD in Adelaide music history from 1960 till 2010 at the moment.
So when you speak about a Bruce Howe type, Barnesy says Don Walker aside, he's the most influential person in his life. So what was it about him that made him not just another musician in another band?
Oh, well, Bruce demanded perfection. He would make you work and work and work until it was perfect. And I think that was good for people with free spirits like Bon Scott. Mm-hmm. It kept them in line and grounded. And what Jimmy talks about was when he left Cold Chisel and he needed to go out on a solo career, the first person he called was Bruce. Bruce told me a story where he goes, Jimmy rings him up and he goes, "You want to join my band?" And he goes, "Yeah, who else is in it?" And Jimmy goes, "Just you and me."
Nice.
And to play on those albums, Body Swerve and For the Working Class Man, Ain't No Second Prize was, probably Bruce's favourite song that he ever played on.
Yep.
He said he laid down the bass track before anything else, because otherwise they'd be in the studio all night because of the tempo changes and things. But
see again, well, these are songs that are so known to everyone, such an iconic, revered album like Working Class Man. We may not know that there's a guy in Semaphore who is this kind of... I don't know if we celebrate enough, maybe, the Adelaide, South Australian music scene with legends like Bruce.
Oh, well, people remember the lead singers, but a lot of the time, sometimes the people on the side are not as remembered. Bruce talked about working a lot with Bon when they went to England, because Fraternity won the Hoadley's Battle of the Sounds in 1971.
Yes.
And they defeated Darryl Braithwaite and Sherbet and Jeff St. John, and the prize ultimately was to go over to England, and their management at the time, Hamish Henry, took them over there, and they got to perform with like Status Quo, and eerily met Bon's successor in AC/DC, Brian Johnson, because they played with his band Geordie.
That's right.
On the same night in Torquay.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like all these, they're intertwining sort of the tentacles of music that can sort of go through these bands too. Talk to us about Fraternity, because I know this is a band that's near and dear to you, and you've done a lot of work away from, radio stations and the concerts that you put on to get them back into the public sort of realm, because they've been probably unfairly, under the radar for quite a while, Fraternity.
Yes, when I first met Bruce and the other members of the band, I think they felt as though that they weren't a successful band because of the trajectory that Bon Scott went on, and then you're unfairly comparing yourself with AC/DC. So if anyone compares themselves, you know, you're not.
You can't.
Yeah. It was interesting process to try and find them one by one and ultimately get them back together and present information from one member to another member, and they'd finish each other's stories off, and then to be given letters that Bon wrote and that dated things, and you could figure out where they were at a certain time and what gigs they were doing or where they were. There was a letter that he had about going to Queensland during the Bjelke J. Peterson era. The police weren't, you know, as nice as today, and they sort of went in and roughed people up a little bit and turned their speakers down.
Yes,
and
it's too loud.
Well, yeah, and Bon called them whatnots on stage. Well, you know, sorry about the whatnots, everybody. So they waited till after the gig, and to the tour manager's horror, Bruce Packer, he's also from Adelaide. He used to write for Go Set. The police chief came up to him and said, "Look, if you're going to carry on like this, we will find the drugs on you." He's going, "We got no drugs," and he figured out they're going to do a plant.
Yeah, wow.
And Bon, of course, is stirring up the junior officer who wanted to look in his bag. No, you can't look in my bag. Can't look in my bag. And they said, "Look, we want to look in your bag." And he finally let them look, and he goes, "Haha, it's just a puffer and a recorder." So the police weren't too impressed with these, you know, the stirring up and the antics. So they said, you know, don't come back to Queensland.
Because he had a bit of rebellion about him, didn't he, Bon Scott?
Oh, yeah. Well, he had this personality that all the members talk about, this infectious personality, and, you know, he could convince you to do anything. Bruce said that he convinced his mum to smoke marijuana. He goes, "Oh, you know, you wouldn't even think that she would." But and also what's been lovely is that over the past couple of years, getting Bruce to reunite with the Bon Scott estate, so Bon's brothers and nephews.
Okay, yep.
So Bon's brother Derek and his son Daniel came to visit Bruce about 2 years ago, and I loved sitting there and hearing the stories that they were telling each other, because Bruce lived with Bon probably just as long as Derek did, and Derek's saying, "Oh, tell me some of the stories," and Bruce says, "Oh, my dad loved Bon. He used to mow the lawn," and Derek just about fell out of his chair, and he goes, "Bon mowed your lawn? If my dad knew that, like he'd just go ballistic."
Because he's such a revered figure too, Bon Scott. Victor Marshall is my guest. We're paying tribute to Adelaide man, music pioneer Bruce Howe, who passed away sadly, but he was so influential in so many bands and different South Australian musicians over that time. Because so it was Bon, wasn't it, in Fraternity, and then you had John Swan, of course, the legend Swanee too, who's been on the show a number of times.
Well, yes. Yep. So after Fraternity returned from England, they were sort of on a hiatus, and Bon had a motorcycle accident, and that's probably what ultimately led him to join AC/DC, because if he didn't have that, he wouldn't have been in Adelaide to meet up with them.
Yes.
He went off with AC/DC, and that left, you know, Bruce to pick up the pieces. So with Uncle, who was from Fraternity, they formed a new band with Swanee on drums and convinced Jimmy to leave Cold Chisel and join Fraternity and sort of, you know, give him his apprenticeship, I guess. And he became so good that when Cold Chisel came back from the East Coast, they stole him back.
Of course I mean, Swanee told us on this show, you know, like there was a chance that he was going to be the lead singer of AC/DC too. Like there's all those stories that things could have been so different with sliding doors. Stay with us. I want to talk to you more on the other side of the break as we pay tribute to one of the greats here in Bruce Howe, because you are a music historian, and I think it's a really interesting thing for people to hear. We love talking about nostalgia and on this show, and particularly about Adelaide and South Australia, but just some of the venues and some of the people here, because people would have seen that story over the summer about the AC/DC house getting knocked down by the council and what kind of outrage that was. Victor Marshall is my guest. He was a good friend of the music pioneer by the name of Bruce Howe, a man who was super influential in the careers of Jimmy Barnes and also Bon Scott. Sadly passed away in Semaphore on Wednesday. Family survived by kids and grandkids?
Yes, his son JJ and his grandkids, Jack and Jasmine.
I find it hard to believe that there's people probably in Semaphore that have stood behind a guy at the supermarket, you know, in the checkout line, not realising that he's one of the most influential people in Australian music, and it's just a guy.
Well, that's what we used to talk about. I actually used to talk about it with friends at high school. You know, imagine walking past one of the guys from Fraternity in Rundle Mall, and they seemed so ominous because they had these pictures where they were in like a forest, which ended up being their property up at Aldgate. But there was only, when I started the book with them, I started off with 2 photographs, and I ended up with, 2,500 photographs. So, I couldn't believe it as we've kept on delving through everything. So it's funny you mentioned that, because that's what we used to talk about at lunchtimes.
So we mentioned earlier you're doing a doctorate in Adelaide music. That will get you, so you'll be Dr. Victor Marshall.
If they think it's good enough, I'll be Dr. Victor Marshall.
In what?
Hopefully.
A doctor of what?
Well, technically it'll be Doctor of Philosophy, but the actual thesis is on the history of Adelaide music from 1960 till 2010.
Sure. So do we realise, does the audience who are listening to you now on this Friday night, do we have any comprehension of just how big the Adelaide music scene was, what changed, I guess, in terms of geography, politics, just society would have changed? There would have been huge changes over those decades.
Oh, significant changes. I couldn't believe in 1960 for the Festival of Arts, someone like Lyle McEwen could ask an artist to perform the show for him privately, and then he could veto songs, because there was an act, like a law from 1913, that allowed him to veto songs if it was deemed to be,
offensive or...
Yeah, well, in other words, poison the minds of the public sort of thing.
Wow,
so,
he had that much power.
Yeah, so there was a pianist from America that came over for it, and he vetoed 4 of his songs in his performance for the 1960 Festival of Arts. And I didn't realise until I researched that they had that much power. And I didn't realise that there wasn't an actual legal drinking age until pretty much the mid-20th century. It was just,
Away you
free
go.
for all.
Wow. No wonder they were getting in fights in all different pubs and clubs around the city. What do we celebrate our history enough, do you think, of Adelaide musicians, Adelaide music, Adelaide bands?
I think it's been getting there over the past decade in particular. I mean, the Adelaide City Council's done the music laneways, and there's been significant work in giving artists awards. But, for someone like Bruce, it would be nice. Whenever you see someone pass away, you see all these beautiful tributes and people that are saying these things. It would have been nice for him to read it while he was alive.
I think the same thing all the time. People are always celebrated in death. It'd be nice before to hear some of that obituary and to give them the credit that they deserve while they can hear it.
Well, you see the awards given posthumously and you go, well, why didn't you give it to him when he was alive? Like Ernest Borgnine getting an award after he died. And you go, well, you had like 90-something years to give him one.
Yeah, nice for the family. Would have been nice for him, though, too. So we do have the lanes now, don't we? So there's like Paul Kelly Lane here in the city somewhere.
Yes, it's behind the Adelaide Town Hall.
Okay. There's Angels. The Angels have got their own lane somewhere.
They were given one recently. I'm not sure if they've had the ceremony for that yet, but I did see it announced.
But see, we need to make that a bigger deal, I think. If you go to Melbourne, for example, AC/DC Lane is a super popular, well-established, everyone knows where it is, street art, all of that kind of stuff. If people are interested in the music of South Australia, and we've got such a rich history, which we'll touch on, but there's so many. Sea of Furler's got one. So Sea's got one on
near the
Morford Street.
Lions Art Factory.
Yeah, that's right. Down
and
the little
there's the mural
sideway
there. And I'd love to see Sister Janet Mead get one. There's the homeless shelter that she ran for the better part of the last half century.
Yep.
Up until she passed away a few years ago. And the laneway actually that runs beside it is yet to be named. So if you go on Google Maps, there's a laneway there. It's not named.
Just a no-brainer.
It seems like a no-brainer, but it's got to be passed by all the red tape and everything.
I say this to Mem Fox all the time. I think there should be a Mem Fox Possum Magic statue at the front of the library. I mean, you think about what Mem's done for the literature world, and that book is iconic.
Yes,
she's one of ours. We should be celebrating that so much. Did you see the story over the summer about the AC/DC house?
Yeah, well, that was unfortunate. I saw the AC/DC house that Angus and Malcolm Young grew up in got knocked down by the council over there, and maybe they didn't realise the value of it historically, but it was on some heritage lists, but they have no legal bearing in Australia, I suppose, so they could knock it down and redevelop it and everything. I also saw the hotel that Michael Hutchins passed away in. That's getting redeveloped, and they're putting like a a statue or a memorial of him in that.
Yeah, so they should. But I think Adelaide needs to do better with this, because you're the perfect person to ask. Give us some of the bands in your thesis that you're doing from the 1960s, people that our audience would remember when they were 20 and 30 years of age. So the 60s and the 70s and stuff, some of the people that were around, and I'm assuming if you went to the northern suburbs, there would be houses that Doc Neeson lived in, or someone from the Twilights, for example.
Oh, yes, so Glenn Shorrock's house, and he went back there a few years ago to have a photo shoot for the Advertiser. So,
do we know it's Glenn Shorrock's house?
Yes, he went there and had a photo in front of it, and Doc's house is there.
No, but I wonder if there's like a plaque.
No.
Or they should put another name under the street. So call it whatever it is now, Smith Avenue.
Yes.
But then just do another little one indicating, maybe people don't want tourists coming to their house, but I think music fans love that. They love to see the origin of genius.
Oh, yes. Well, even if we had like a little tour, a self-guided tour, I always would have loved, as you go to the airport, to be some sort of billboard that says, because we're the UNESCO City of Music, but not many people sort of know that. It's not out there. And if you had like a billboard at the airport as people are getting off their planes and they see a picture of Sia and Doc Neeson and Jimmy Barnes and Glenn Shorrock and, Fraternity, all of these significant bands, that would get their attention. Have a little QR code that takes them to a website. Here's our record stores. Here's our sites. Here's the Walk of Fame down at the Festival Centre. Here's the laneways.
It just seems like an opportunity lost that we're not doing. I think other cities and other countries personally do it better, and I've seen it firsthand. I was talking to you off air about it, that I went in the city that I was in over Christmas, where I was having time with my family. Fred Astaire was born there, so we went to Fred Astaire's house. Now, if they're big enough and it's not owned by someone, you can actually make that in. I think you could have made the AC/DC house into a museum. I mean, they are that revered. Maybe there are others that you wouldn't necessarily make a whole museum for them, but they do it with presidents, they do it with other people. I don't know why we don't make a bigger deal and celebrate these great people.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because actually a house that Bruce and Bond lived in Prospect, it's now like a doctor's surgery. Okay. And so he actually went back there recently, not as a house, but as a doctor's place, and they actually knew that they lived in there, and they said, that's the Bond room and that's the Bruce room, and they knew exactly where they were in the house. So he was knocked out by that.
Well, see, I know you're busy enough, you got a lot on your plate, but let's get you somehow with the powers that be, and you help run this. Let's get more celebration of the great South Australian artists, bands, musicians, etc. Doesn't have to be a huge deal, but let's get more awareness of that, so that we don't read about it in an obituary down the track and think, gee, it would have been nice to celebrate person X.
Yeah, there's discussions with the council for, other band laneways and things. Bands.
Who else should have one? Fraternity? You love Fraternity.
They should have one down at Semaphore, but like the Master's Apprentices would be nice to have behind the King's Head Hotel there. That's John Street that the band sort of started there, and Brian Vorton, the drummer, his parents owned the hotel, and that's where they began.
So imagine Master's Apprentices Lane, or a nice big painting, mural type, whatever celebration, and then the members who are still with us, they see it, and what a great thing for them.
Well, there's the iconic wall from all those promo shots still there, that blue stone wall. Mm-hmm. It'd be cool to have like that. They've got the Beatles up on the acrylic on the town balcony, have a cutout of them there, and people can come and have photos or things. It'd make it a tourist attraction.
I agree. I think the acrylic's nice at the town hall. It should actually be a statue. We talk about statues a lot on this radio station, whether people are deserving or not. The other night it was Novak Djokovic at the tennis, but you can't tell me that every time you see the town hall, what do people think about? They think about the Beatles and Bob Francis. Like, there should be statues of that, so that the random tourist who is in Adelaide for the Tour Down Under or the 500 or whatever the case might be walks through King William Street, looks up at the town hall and goes, there they are. That would be amazing.
Yeah, or to walk around and see where the old venues used to be, and do the walk around and see those music laneways. And
that might be a little side business for us. You're busy enough. You're studying, you're putting on shows. Now, you are putting on shows because you have great organisation. Give us a rough idea of some of the people you've brought to town previously, and then we'll talk about normally who's coming up.
I've done quite a few. Last year, a real thrill for me was to work with Hank Marvin. That was a
Legend.
Yeah. Like the guitarist that started it all from the Shadows. I've got Ross Wilson coming, and it's always fun with Ross.
Bongo's one of yours.
Oh, yeah. Bongo, actually, I saw him last week in Geelong, and then a couple of days later, he rang me and said that he's got leukemia.
Yeah, I know.
So he's actually in hospital and fighting that.
Yeah,
but you wouldn't have known when you saw him.
I'm sorry to hear that. He was in with us last year. Yeah, I read that. He's got aggressive leukemia, so he's taking some time out. Lovely guy, though.
Oh, yeah. And actually, so many people rallying around him, his social media and the news went to the UK and everything, and everyone's so supportive of him. He's so lovely.
One of the only guests I've ever had to dump. He dropped the F-bomb. It was a Friday night. He was a bit loose, so that was okay. Wilbur, I know you brought out. Frankie Holden, you brought out. So you've had some great names.
I spoke with Wilbur today, and he's going to go and see Bongo on the weekend. Yeah, go and visit him. Well done. We did that big Fraternity anniversary a couple of years ago at the Theban Theatre, and we had Spectrum and Chain and Master Apprentices. We had Vicar and Linda Bull last year.
Yep.
There's so many.
Now, Thebby Sounds is part of your baby. Normie Rowe's coming to town. He's in Goolwa on Saturday the 26th of April, and he's here at the Bridgeway, Bridge Road in Paraka on the Sunday the 27th of April.
Yes.
So people can get on to thebbysounds.com.au. He's a lovely guy and popular figure.
I can't believe it. Actually, there's this funny story with him and other artists. There's a guy called Mark in Adelaide, and he comes to a lot of these shows and wants autographs and everything, and he talks about, I met Jimi Hendrix and I met Brian Jones. He goes, sure, and then he'll produce the photos with these people. When he rocked up to Glenn, he's going, this guy's been coming to my gigs since 1965, and he's still collecting autographs and things. And
can I tell you a funny story? The 6 Degrees of Separation. Mark is a regular caller to this show.
Oh, really?
Mark has been in a couple of times. He's actually going to come in soon with Leo from Paraka, who's his best mate, because he's released a book. And we were same. We were he said, I've met all the Beatles. We said, no, you haven't. And then he showed us photos, and he's met them all. And the Stones, and he's met Mark Bolan and everyone you can imagine. Mark's known for two things. He runs around a lot. Yeah. So you always find him at Outer Harbour or sort of Semaphore area running around. He's like a marathon man. But yeah, he's like the ultimate Adelaide groupie who's met everybody. It's amazing, isn't it?
I was at a barbecue. Actually, David Briggs and B. Birtles from Little River Band were awarded the Order of Australia's over the weekend. And David had a celebratory barbecue. And Greg McCainch from Skyhooks was there, and I hadn't met him before, and we got talking, and he goes, hey, about Adelaide, because you're from there, there's this guy that used to come to our shows, and he had these autographs. And
that is hilarious. He's more well-known than some of the musos, Mark. That is funny. Right, so Normie Rowe, I've got the official details here. He's at the Goolwa Centenary Hall, which is a beautiful venue, actually. My mum got naturalised there last year on Australia Day.
Wow.
You can experience the incredible journey of Normie Rowe. It's called The Story So Far, so it's Normie's memories, stories, and the people. I might actually hit you up and see if we can get Normie on the show to promote that particular show. Grapeorganisation.com or thebbysounds.com is where you get your tickets for that one. So that is on the 26th of April at the Goolwa Centenary Hall, which is, again, a beautiful venue right in the main street of Goolwa there on the left-hand side. And then at the Bridgeway, the following day, the Sunday, the 27th of April, it's Normie and the Masters together. So that'll be some sort of show too. So people can get tickets via the bridgeway.live or, again, Grape Organisation or Thebby Sounds for that. Victor, thanks for coming in. It's always fascinating. You're like, I say this with peace and love, you're like the Rain Man of Adelaide music. You've got this photographic memory of all the things we need to know, which is always fascinating. So good luck with the PhD. First and foremost, good luck with your side business of getting more South Australians recognised in the city and the streets of Adelaide. We look forward to that, and thanks for paying tribute to Bruce. Greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to pay tribute to him.
Well done. Victor Marshall, man about town, good friend of Bruce Howe's, and also the co-director and music promoter for Grape Organisation. Bruce Howe, music pioneer, one of the men who pretty much guided the likes of Jimmy Barnes and Bon Scott, amongst others, passing away at the age of 77 in Semaphore on Wednesday.